Hey collectors, guess what I got for you guys today? The ultimate Seraphon painting guide with Lord Kroak!
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. My name is Kenneth and I'll be your guide for this ultimate Seraphon painting tutorial. This video is for all you Seraphon and Lizardman fans out there. In this video, you're going to find a whole slew of materials that I will be covering that will be essential for you to paint up all your Seraphon models. As usual, we have divided this video into short and easy to watch chapters so that you can skip on ahead and find the part that you want to use for your own Seraphon models so that you can mix and match to your own heart's content. In any case, this guide isn't the definitive way of how you should be painting Seraphon. Just go ahead with the same techniques on different parts and you can create your own fresh results too. In this guide, I will be primarily using AK Generation 3 paints. However, I will also be sharing the GW alternatives that I will recommend for this. If you are using another paint brand, don't worry, just mix up something similar and you can produce a very similar result. Just remember that the concept is much more important than the actual recipes. So in this video, I'll be covering how to paint the following materials: foundation, green jade, stone, NMM Gold, Lord Kroak himself, Seraphon skin, feathers, crystals, leaves and roots. And in the last chapter, which is environment, I'll be talking about the little critters that are on Lord Kroak's throne as well as the basing for this entire model. So in this part of the video, I'd like to share my concept about how I approach and paint the Lord Kroak models. So if you are here just for the painting portions, why don't you just skip on ahead because I'll be covering how I've done the foundation stages. So in this concept stage, I'll be talking about the colors which I've chosen and you guys have voted for it. The subscribers of the channel have chosen for us to use fluorescent colors for Lord Kroak and hence I have delivered. So the fluorescent colors that I've chosen is meant to look like Lord Kroak is currently in a trans-galactic fever dream. So one question you might ask, why do the fluorescent colors have to go down first? The answer is that I want the fluorescent colors to permeate all the translucent layers which I will be laying on subsequently. This serves as my other painting and you will see how important this is in my subsequent stages. Additionally, I want Lord Kroak to stand out exceptionally in this model. As such, I've played with the color temperature so that the environment is increasingly warm while Lord Kroak stays really cool and he's really glowing. And because Lord Kroak is gonna be glowing, I'm gonna make this tie in with all the environment so that this entire piece is nice and coherent. So without further ado, let's move on to the foundation stage of this ultimate Seraphon painting guide. Welcome to the first chapter of the ultimate Seraphon painting guide. In this chapter, I'll be outlining how I laid out the foundation colors and my underpainting for this entire model. In this stage, I'll put on the environmental lights as well as decide the light positioning and the light direction for the entire model. I know that this sounds really intimidating, but fret not. I will be making changes along the way to see what fits better, so you can do that too. So if you aren't totally happy with the light placements or the colors, these things aren't set in stone. You can always make the changes later to your heart's content. Just relax. For this chapter, you're going to need these colors right here. Alternatively, if you're using Games Workshop, these colors will work just fine. Alright, so let's get the foundation stage rolling right now. So now that the model is primed entirely in black, I'm currently picking up the key details of Lord Kroak's throne. I'm currently doing this in sub-assemblies and I'm applying a very thin layer of AK Gen 3 pale grey. So this helps to identify areas which allows me to focus my painting later. These are the areas that I want to showcase to the viewer when I'm painting. Okay, so just focusing on some of the edges, some of the curves, so that when the viewer looks at this model, it looks a lot more interesting. Okay, gradually I'm adding in a little bit of AK Gen 3 off-white to really push up the value. So what value is fundamentally the light and dark value of a certain color. So in this case, I'm trying to make sure that some areas appear more bright and more light than the areas that I've sprayed previously with AK Gen 3 Pale Grey. So now going on with a light glaze of fluorescent pink from AK Gen 3, I'm just going over to increase the saturation or the color intensity of this area. Okay, so my overall composition is to have a diagonal of fluorescent pink going from bottom left to top right, and going to have a fluorescent green color going from top left to bottom right. Okay, so that's why I'm just following the plan right now. I'm just placing in the areas of fluorescent pink. And I'm also just going to be placing on some random areas of fluorescent pink so that these areas will lend a little bit more interest to the model. I want the stone to look a lot more complex so that when the viewer looks at this, it looks like it's really well thought of. But honestly, I'm just as confused as you are. So just don't worry about placing colors, just place the colors as you wish and place them so that it aesthetically pleases you, because we're going to make changes along the way, and I'm going to be glazing and reglazing fluorescent colors over and over the stone area, so there are going to be a multitude of changes along the way. So this is all not set in stone. Just be free and just express yourself and just have fun, because I think fundamentally, as long as you have fun and as long as you like the composition, that is the most important. So I really like how this fluorescent pink is interacting with the fluorescent green. Yeah, it's really contrasting colors, and I never thought that these colors would go together. It's look like some psychedelic galactic trance. I don't know how to describe this, but yeah, it's very psychedelic colors here. Okay, so now fluorescent blue, I'm going to be just placing it in the middle of the composition because that's the only area where Lord Kroak will be. I want to draw all the attention to the middle, where that's the only cool color area, where everywhere else is going to be slightly warmer in temperature. So color temperature is really important when I do color composition, because I want to make sure that this composition leads the eye to look at Lord Kroak himself. Okay, so this is Lord Kroak himself. This is his base undercolors. I'm just going to be spraying some fluorescent blues over the entire part of the model. Then I'm going to hit the middle with just AK Gen 3 off-white to really showcase the glowing power of him and his power belly. And I'm going with fluorescent blue once again in the extremities to really darken down the colors, but just to retain the high value, which is in his chest area where the energy is emanating from. Okay, you just want to do this in very thin layers, just gradually. And this is my foundation stage, where you will have the entire model base coated. Now that the foundation stage has been complete, we are going to move on to the different types of stone and rock on Lord Kroak's throne. Many of the Seraphon models have always been decorated with different types of stone and masonry. It would be such a shame if all of them were the same color, material, or even finish. In this chapter, we'll be covering how to paint green jade, which will complement the different types of rocks that were used to construct Lord Kroak's throne. This chapter uses the technique called glazing, and fundamentally glazing is just using a transparent paint over a dried surface to increase the saturation on a given layer. So for this chapter, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. So got the colors ready? Alright, let's rock. I hope you got the pun. So I'm currently working on the green jade, and I'm currently using AK Gen 3 turquoise to do this very heavy overbrushing. This is going to be sort of like the base coat layer, and because I'm using an overbrush technique, it's going to leave some of the fluorescent color showing underneath, which is very important. Just leave some of this fluorescent color showing underneath because it adds a lot of complexity. Do this also for the toad head in the middle of his throne right in the front. Okay, so gradually I'm adding in a little bit of AK Gen 3 blue-green. Don't worry, the Games Workshop colors, the alternative colors, will also be listed in the description. So you can always check that out. For me right now, I'm just focusing the blue-green on the top edges of the two snakes on top of the throne and on the curves on the toad head in the middle. Yeah, I'll just call this a toad head so that we know what we're talking about right here. Alright, so gradually I'm adding in a little bit more and more blue-green from AK Gen 3. Now focusing even more on the top edges, but what you can see right now is I'm going through a very stabby, stipply motion so that I can showcase the roughness of the material. I want to showcase this roughness first because subsequently I'll be glazing down this stage and you can see how this affects the entire surface. So right here I'm going over with a glaze of Atonian Camo Shade. Okay, so the Atonian Camo Shade allows me to increase the saturation, and saturation is the intensity of the color. For Jade, you want to really emphasize on how green and how intense the colors are. So that's the overall first glaze. Secondly, I'm going to be focusing into the shadows. What I want is to create a light and dark contrast. So by using Atonian Camo Shade in a selective manner, I'm glazing into the shadows. So I'm sort of like doing a layering technique, but then because it's transparent, I'm building up darker and darker layers so that you can see this. And then finally, with my third glaze, I'm going even more selectively, and what you can see, look at this. You can see very strong contrast in this Jade already. Some very light and very dark areas, and we're going to push this contrast slightly further in the next stage. Alright, so I'm mixing in a little bit of blue-green along with some pale blue from AK Gen 3. Alright, so right here I'm doing this in a very scratchy method. If you're using Games Workshop, you can always use Temple Cut Blue mixed in with a little bit of Games Workshop White Scar. I guess you achieve a pretty similar effect. And what's important is you want to have a slightly bluish green high value so that you can do these scratches and showcase that this material that it's being made of, this Jade, has been scratched and damaged along the eons of time that Lord Kroak has existed. So are you jaded already? We're going to move on to our next rocking chapter. Okay, enough of this. So let's move on to the most prominent feature of Lord Kroak's throne, the stone itself. For this chapter, I'll be using the floral base as well as the overbrushing technique prominently. So if you're not sure what the overbrushing technique is, you can go check out the overbrushing video which I have produced. Links will be in the description below. So fundamentally, the main concept of this overbrushing technique is to build up rough layers over one another from dark to light so that you can create this stone texture and communicate to the audience that this surface isn't as smooth as it looks. So for this chapter, I will be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. Alright, got the colors ready? Let's rock! So currently what I'm using dark sea grey, and I'm moistening the brush using a moist sponge right here. So I'm currently using the dark sea grey and overbrushing all over the entire throne. I'm doing this super liberally and not really giving a damn where I'm placing it. So right now I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 neutral grey, and I'm going to be overbrushing the stone areas, and what you can see is that this really brings out the shine and brings out the forms of the entire shape. Okay, I'm doing this very roughly so that I create a rough stone-like texture, but I'm doing this very selectively on all the edges, on all the peaks, and this allows me to showcase how the base was sculpted. Yep, there we are. So now I'm mixing in a little bit of that tan into the neutral grey, and I'm doing this in this scratchy method. I'm using the same exact technique as I've done in the previous chapter. So if you're not sure about that, you can check that out, because what we're trying to showcase is we're trying to showcase the damage over time that this throne has endured, and I'm also doing some edge highlights to showcase the sharp edges on this stone that is very carefully carved out. Okay, so using the same color mix, I'm using the overbrush. I'm doing this pulling method rather than this stippling method right now, because I find that this catches the edges a lot better, and this is slightly different from dry brushing because the paint I'm using is slightly moist and leaves a lot of brush marks. This brush marks, as I mentioned, helps create the effect that the stone has been worn down over eons of time, and this is really the effect I'm going for. Okay, so when doing this, you want to make sure that the paint is slightly moist, and you don't want to overdo this because you want to leave a little bit of the fluorescent color showing underneath. The Games Workshop equivalents for this would be something like, I would say you can use Ushakti Bone mixed in with just a little bit of Screaming Skull and maybe a little bit of Administratum Grey, and this will do just fine. Yep. So you can see, because it's a very thin coat, I'm doing this over even the pinks, and you can see that the pinks are still showing through, and this is the importance of the undercoat. The undercoat allows these very complex colors to show underneath, and I've learned this technique while I'm painting the Slaneshi Warhammer Underworlds dude earlier this year. I think this is something really fun, and I think you should just try this out with underpainting. Now that the stone areas on Lord Kroak's throne have been complete, let's move on to the embellishments. So in this chapter, we are going to be painting the NMM Gold on Lord Kroak. So for non-metallic metal gold, I've used it very commonly, and remember, you can use this on all your other Seraphon models because I believe that they've all been decked out in gold. What kind of Aztec themed miniature would not have Aztec gold? So for this stage, I will be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. Alright, let's go make some Seraphon shiny right now. So I've base coated the surface using AK Gen 3 Dark Rust, which you can substitute for Games Workshop Brine Oxide. Currently, I'm mixing in a little bit of AK Gen 3 Green Brown into the Dark Rust and creating this orange tone. Similarly, what you can do is use Games Workshop Baylor Brown to substitute the Green Brown, and you can mix in with Rhinoxide to create this orange tone as well. Alternatively, you can just use Montfang Brown. Alright, so when doing non-metallic metal, what's important is you want to be focusing on the shapes. You want to see all the little micro details, and you want to focus on the edges because that's where the light is going to be showing. So right here, I'm going to be doing the initial sketch, and I'm going to deliberately make this initial sketch a lot wider because you want to have small areas that you can work on, and you don't want these areas to be too small because if it's too small, even a painter like me, I can't reach very small areas. So I'm using pure AK Gen 3 Green Brown right here. Okay, so right here I'm just going to focus on the forms and shapes, and I'm just leaving a little bit of the previous color showing. Okay. Awesome. Now finally, I'm going to be adding in the highlight color, which is AK Gen 3 Pale Yellow. What you can do is you can mix in a little bit of Phalanx Yellow from Games Workshop with a little bit of White Skull to achieve a similar color. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this up, and you can see the finished result in some subsequent stages. Okay, just all about painting and leaving a little bit of the colors behind and edge highlighting. Now that the non-metallic metal gold is done, in this chapter we're going to cover how to paint the main star of the show, Lord Kroak himself. The concept for Lord Kroak, as I've mentioned, would be that Lord Kroak is going to be glowing so that he ties in with the rest of the environment. As such, I'm going to make Lord Kroak show that he has an internal glow and make him look almost ethereal in nature. This glow comes from his belly, which many spiritual practitioners feel like the energy comes from. This is going to be a little complex, so I hope I can pull this off. I'm going to be using these colors right here to paint this effect. Okay, alternatively you can use these colors. And let's get painting Lord Kroak right now. So for Lord Kroak himself, he has already been base coated in fluorescent blue with a little bit of white glowing through his chest. I'm currently base coating all his bandages in AK Gen 3 Burnt Umber. You can use Games Workshop Dry Bark to replace this stage. Okay, I'm also going to be base coating the rest of the artifacts on Lord Kroak. Let's say his necklace, I'm going to do it in interior yellow, and the gold areas, I'm going to be doing this in dark rust. Currently, I'm mixing in a little bit of burnt umber with a bit of ducat blue, and this allows me to sort of illustrate that the glow is coming through his bandages. Okay, so I'm focusing this more closely towards his chest and his tummy, because this is where the power is emanating from, but because it's obscured by his hands, probably can't really see much of this, and I'm going to be working on this using an airbrush subsequently. Mixing in a little bit of snow blue with a bit of raw umber here. I'm going to be picking out the gaps in between his bandage to showcase the glow and the energy peeking through the little gaps. I think that's what's important to sell the effect, but honestly, this is one of the first time I've tried a reverse glow. The other time I've tried this was with the Nurgle Grey Unclean one, and that was really challenging. Okay, so now using a bit of ducat blue mixed in with a bit of snow blue, I'm going to be creating the strongest highlights. And right now I'm going to be focusing on the form of the exposed skin. And for the exposed skin, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be picking out the main areas such as the fingers, the toes, so that Lord Kroak just doesn't seem like he's a mess of crumpled blue. Wow, so we have just finished Lord Kroak and we're going to start painting the Seraphon skin. For my take on this model, I'm going to be following the grey skin on the box art so that it doesn't clash with colours too much. Even though I'm going to be painting him grey, I'm going to be suggesting some colour progressions right here so that you can paint up skink blue Seraphon skin, red Seraphon skin. So with those color progressions, and if you follow this tutorial, we are roughly going to use the same techniques. Mostly contrast and layering up from there. Okay, for my white grey Seraphon skin, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. And let's get to painting some Seraphon skin right now. So for the Seraphon skin, I've done a Zenithal airbrush of white over black. And then after that, I've done a nice generous contrast shading of Apothecary White. So I'm just going to be base coating some of the basic areas, such as the eye in black, and I've also done the teeth in Agros Dunes. So what's going to happen next, I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 Burnt Red for the tongue. You can substitute this with Mephiston Red or Corn Red for the tongue if you wish. And right here, I'm going to be painting the bottom half of the eye with AK Gen 3 Burnt Red. Okay, gradually I'm going to be adding in a little bit of AK Gen 3 Deep Red right here. And this is because I'm going to be painting the eye as some sort of clear crystal. And you can see this effect in just a little bit. I'm just going to dot the highest shine with pure white here. And there we go. That's the eye done. So now we're going to work on the skin. So what I'm going to be doing for the skin is I'm going to be using pale blue. I'm using pale blue over the entire area to sort of like reinforce the shapes. Okay, just do this very controlled. Don't want to have this all over the Seraphon so that you don't overpower Lord Kroak. And then I'm going to be picking up the ridges and the little details and the edges using AK Gen 3 Ivory. You can always substitute this color using Games Workshop Screaming Skull. Just do this very lightly. And there we have it. Now that we are in the end game, we're going to paint up some more delicate details such as the feathers. For this stage, I'm going to be swapping out my brush for a thinner brush so that I can paint the little fibers of the feathers. Remember that you can paint the feathers in any color you want, and I'll be suggesting some colors that you can use to paint different colored feathers. Right here, I'm going to be recommending some color progressions that you might want to use if you want to paint different colored feathers. So for red feathers, you might want to use this color progression. For blue feathers, you might want to use this color progression. For green feathers, you might want to use this color progression right here. And lastly, for yellow color progression, you might want to use these color progressions. So for my very own feathers, I'm going to be painting it up in fluorescent pink. Very striking, and I think it's going to complement the entire model very nicely. For this stage, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. Alright, so let's get these colors ready and let's get painting the fluorescent pink feathers on Lord Kroak's crown right now. Alright, so we're going to be base coating the entire area using AK Gen 3 fluorescent pink. This is a pretty translucent color. You want to do this in multiple layers. Don't want to obscure any of the details. Okay, I'm doing this over black, which is probably not such a good idea, but we'll see how this works out later. Okay, so I'm mixing in a little bit of fluorescent pink along with a little bit of dark sand. You can always substitute dark sand with Games Workshop Zen3 dust, and right now I'm focusing more on the ridges and the volume. What do I mean by the volumes? So by volumes, I want to simplify the feather down into a shape, and I'm just gonna be doing these very thin streaks, and this creates the texture. But then as for volumes, I'm not focusing too much on the sculpted details. You can see some gaps in the feather. Just don't care about them, just paint them as if they were not there. Okay, gradually adding in a little bit of pale sand to the mix, a bit more fluorescent pink. Okay, then I'm still focusing on the volumes and I'm not even picking out the ridges yet. Right now I'm just working in between the layers that I painted previously and doing this streaky pattern, because right here you can see in the other feathers, you can already see that the feathers are starting to look very lush. This is the same mindset that I take when I'm painting hair. Okay, just at the last part, pick on some of the smaller details and that is it. So now that majority of the model has been completed, we're going to look at the small little components of the model. And in this chapter, I'm going to be focusing on how to paint crystals. So just keep watching, because no matter how complex a shape is, we can paint them in crystal style. So I'll be using Lord Kroak's crystal ball in his staff, and it's a really complex D100, D200 shape. So first and foremost, we need to understand how a crystal works. Because it's transparent, it's going to be darker at the top and lighter at the bottom, because light travels through the entire crystal and it collects at the bottom edge. So now that we've done the main volume, we're going to pick on the external form of the crystal, which is probably a lot of edge highlighting on this crystal ball. So now that the edge highlighting has been done, we're going to see how we can render the individual faces so that this crystal looks as eye-popping as possible. Okay, so for this stage, I'm going to be using these colors right here to paint the crystal. Alternatively, you can use these colors. And let's paint the big ball crystal on Lord Kroak right now. So now I'm base coating the entire crystal using AK Gen 3 Black. Alternatively, of course, you can use Abaddon Black or any other brand. Black is pretty universal, just want to achieve a smooth coat. So gradually I'm adding in a little bit of AK Gen 3 Burnt Red into the mix, and I'm going to do the bottom 70% of this. Why I'm starting to highlight the bottom part rather than the top is because light tends to pass through transparent objects such as this D100, D200 crystal, and light will collect at the bottom edge. Gradually I'm adding in a little bit of AK Gen 3 Deep Red, and you can substitute this for Evil Sun Scarlet from Games Workshop. Okay, just gradually pushing down the red intense light collection at the bottom. I'm doing this with AK Gen 3 Dead Red right now. Okay, there's still a bit of deep red, that's why there's some saturation in this process. Okay, So right here, I'm going to be edge highlighting the entire process, the entire D100, every single edge. I'm going to do this with deep red. You want to showcase this because the edges still collect light. Although light passes through, the edges still reflect some light. So you want to do this stage, and you will really show and make the crystal look a lot more lifelike. Gradually adding in a little bit of white with the deep red, I'm going to be picking out the connection points of these edges, because these are the areas where light will be picked up and the glints will happen. Okay, I'm going to be using a bit of AK Gentry off-white here. You can use white scar if you want. I'm going to be placing a glint on the top of the crystal. I'm not sure whether this will work, but I guess in the final result it worked, and I'm really happy with this. Okay, so now going over with an entire glaze of Games Workshop Carabao Crimson. This helps me tie everything together and makes the crystal look very, very unified. Okay, so now I'm going to be painting the crystals in the serpent's mouth. I'm going to be doing this with a huge fat glaze of Carabao Crimson and doing this just all over the entire area because I want to make sure and I want to communicate that this is actually glowing. I find that this isn't enough, that's why I'm going to go over with an even fatter glaze of AK Gentry Burnt Red. You can always use Games Workshop Mephiston Red to replace this, and this is fundamentally what I'm doing. And after this glow, I'm going to be adding in a little bit of AK Gentry Deep Red. The Deep Red really showcases the glow and increases the value and saturation at the same time. I'm deliberately adding the glow at the bottom part because, of course, the crystal is attached to the bottom part and I guess that's where the energy is emanating from. Okay, just adding in a little bit of Deep Red to showcase the strongest part of the energy before I'm going to use AK Gentry Deep Red to edge highlight the crystals to tell the audience that this is a crystal rather than this is a lump of red mass just glowing randomly in the serpent's mouth. Just edge highlighting the sides of the teeth also just to bring this point even more clearly across. So now that we have painted up Lord Kroak's crystal ball, we're going to paint up the leaves and roots on this model. What kind of Aztec tropical theme model would not have leaves? And we're going to focus on how the science behind this works. So for leaves, they always have a base color. Sometimes this base color can be yellow and sometimes these base colors can be orange like you see in autumn. And fundamentally, leaves all work the same because the green leaves have chlorophyll in them, and when the chlorophyll gets decomposed, what's left behind is the body, which is yellow or orange. So we're going to start off with the yellow and orange coat and move on to subsequent colors. For this stage, I'm going to be basing my leaves in yellow, and I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. So let's get all these colors ready and let's paint the leaves and roots of this crone right now. So for the leaves, I've started off with a base coat of AK Gentry Interior Yellow. You can substitute this with Games Workshop Avalanche Sunset, and currently I'm using Grass Green to just sort of like highlight the forms of the leaves. Don't worry, because we're going to go over with a shade of Games Workshop Atonian Camo shade. I like doing this because after doing the initial layers, this allows the shadows to show through. When you're painting miniatures, you want to have a nice showcase of shadows, midtones and highlights. And you want to have the shadows done first because usually the shadows are kind of hard to paint in the recesses. Okay, so now that the shadows are done with the camo shade, I'm going to move on with Grass Green once again to build on that volume. This allows the leaves to look really luscious, lifelike, while having a bit of that yellow showcase because leaves tend to have chlorophyll that die off, and when it dies off, it tends to showcase the yellow body itself. Okay, so now moving on, I'm going to be using AK Gentry Frog Green and creating the final highlights for the leaves. Alternatively, you can use Mood Green from Games Workshop to replace this stage, and you can achieve a pretty similar effect. Just don't overdo this, just picking on the little areas and the edges along the way so that the leaf looks natural. Okay, so right now I'm base coating the roots in AK Gen 3 matte brown. Find it, this is a really nice brown to use because it's hard to describe. It's kind of orange, but not too orange, and I really like this because it helps split the entire model apart. Just make sure that you paint all the roots on this model because there are so many dangling roots and so many dangling parts of the plant on this model, and it really helps, well, differentiate the different parts. Currently I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 green brown mixed in with matte brown to achieve this stage. What you can do is you can use Rhinox hide mixed in with Baylor brown, and you can achieve pretty similar effect, and you can really showcase the big empty areas on the roots as nice, very well developed bark. So now that the leaves and roots have been painted, we're going to move on to the final stage, which is the little details and environment. So for this stage, I'm going to be picking up the little things that you might not notice, such as the poison dart frogs, the lizards, as well as little details that I've spotted while painting this model. And also I'm going to be tying up this entire model through finishing the base and all the other tiny little details. For this stage, you're going to need these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors. Okay, so let's finish up Lord Kroak right now. Because there are so many critters all around Lord Kroak, I'm just going to be using the snakes as an example, and you can use this color scheme to paint the lizards, the frogs, and all the other little critters you spot along the way on Lord Kroak. Okay, so I'm going to be base coating the green snakes in AK Gen 3 Russian green. You can always use some Death Guard green to replace this. Okay. So for the green snakes, I'm going to be using camouflage green mixed in with a little bit of green sky. This serves as the highlight color, and I'm doing this pretty liberally. You can always use this color scheme for the lizards as well. There's a lizard on the root on the left hand side of Lord Kroak, so you don't want to miss that out. And for the brown snakes, I'm currently using a little bit of green brown mixed in with a little bit of camouflage green. This allows me to create this dirty looking yellow-brown color, which I find very useful for snakes and other critters as well. Currently, I'm just adding in more and more light brown into the brown snake mix, and I'm starting to do this a lot more carefully, focusing on what is sculpted, and right here I'm leaving some of the empty areas so that I can show the big scales on the snakes. Alright. Now time for the nice wash. I'm currently using Games Workshop Agrax Earthshade to shade down the entire area so that I can see where the scales are, and I can best illustrate them in the subsequent stage. So right here, I'm going to be starting to draw little dots in row by row, gradually adding in more AK Gen 3 green sky to the existing mix, and I find that this adds a lot of texture, adds a lot more realism to the snakes because snakes are covered in scales. As for the brown snakes, I'm gradually adding in more light brown into the existing mix. Of course, I'm still doing the row by row thing. Do it row by row so that you can create your very own scales yourself. Now, I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 Sky Green. Alternatively, you can just use green mixed in with a little bit of white scar. I think can achieve a pretty similar effect. Or Elysian green mixed in with white scar. Okay, just showcasing the peaks of the snakes. And I'm going to be doing the same for the brown snakes as well. Okay, just going to be using a little bit of pale yellow mixed in with light brown. And this will showcase the sparkle on the scales of the snake. I really hate this stage because right after this, I'm going to destroy all this hard work. Okay, so now the things are done. I'm just going to airbrush over the whole thing using fluorescent blue to showcase the glow of Lord Kroak. As you can see, all my hard work is going to waste. Why did I even do this? I have no idea, but I guess it's all for the effect. You really want to show the underlying details, and yeah, this is the result of all my hard work. It's gone. Okay, I'm gonna be spraying in some AK Gen 3 Ducat Blue. You can always use Games Workshop Temple Guard Blue to replace this stage. Okay, so this is starting to showcase the blue glow from Lord Kroak. And now I put Lord Kroak in. Yeah, it's glowing already. No, it's not. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm going to be cleaning it up off camera. Okay, I'm going to be using wet mud from AK Gen 3. I'm just going to slush it all around the base, just covering the gaps. Because this model is really complex. Couldn't really get it to really stick together, so can't really get it to stick to the base, and I'm just going to use the mud effects to hide my incapabilities. Okay, using a tweezer and some Citadel skulls, I'm just going to place it in. I'm going to be so lazy, I'm not even going to be priming the skulls. I'm just going to place them in. But surprisingly, I'm going to be subsequently hiding them using a shade. And you can see how this shade kind of works on bare plastic. So right here, I'm going to be using Games Workshop Atonian Camo Shade. And Atonian Camo Shade is kind of fun, and I'm just going to be placing it all around the base so that it's like algae building up. And because of the skulls are just grey, I'm just going to be painting them over the skulls to see how they turn out. Because I'm really so tired painting this model already, I just want to finish this model. And look, it kind of works. I guess that's okay. So I'm going to be using water glue. This is just normal like PVA glue mixed in with a little bit of butane green from Games Workshop. And this slush I'm going to be placing in little puddles across the base, and this will serve as dried off algae. You're going to see the final result in the 360, and I find that it adds a lot more dimension. Don't worry, it won't dry off as this beautiful luscious pool of green. It's going to shrivel up and it's going to shrink, and it's going to work as a very convincing swamp base, which I will be using for the Dominion. So stay tuned for that little video of that. And there we have it. That's the finished product of Lord Kroak. And let's take a look at the 360 video right now. So this is the final version of Lord Kroak. I really like how Lord Kroak is glowing very coolly in the middle of all the warm colors. I wish I had a little bit more time to spend painting the base and developing the rest of the other elements on Lord Kroak, but of course I have to call it done because I'm preparing to paint out Dominion, so stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for watching all the way to the end, and I hope you found this ultimate Seraphon painting guide useful. Remember, if you found it useful, why not give me a like and subscribe, because it really helps out the channel and keeps the light on. Painting up your own Lord Kroak or Seraphon? Why not just tag us on Instagram, and I'll be happy to have a look and give you guys some useful tips and pointers for your own painting. Thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. If you want to support the channel even further, head on to our Patreon and become a patron today. Get a whole slew of painting content which I have been producing for the year. And I'd like to thank you guys all from the bottom of my heart for watching all the way to the end. Thank my patrons too for allowing me to do this, and I hope to see you in our next painting video, which is likely going to be AOS 3.0 Dominion. See you guys then. See you.